earlier, I think that Canada has a world-renowned public service, and it's integral that we don't attack them to try and score political points. Everybody in this country, and especially elected officials, have, I think, a responsibility, a duty to ensure that we protect our institutions, and that the last thing we should try and do is to somehow diminish them just in the hope that we could score points.
Now, Guilbeault said in a podcast after that in March that the politicians, they're the real victims here, and they must be spared the criticisms of the very people who elected them and pay their salaries. Take a listen.
We've seen too many examples of public officials retreating from public service due to the hateful online content targeted towards themselves or even their families.
The Liberals have announced their internet censor. We have a plan to fight back, but we cannot do it alone. We need your help. This is an absolute emergency. Friends, this is a 5-alarm fire. The Liberals are ready to introduce the mechanism they will use to seize control of the one part of your life they haven't been able to completely control so far, the internet. Now, what's coming will be a bill, although it's not one yet. It will be introduced in the next sitting of the House of Commons, and it will indeed pass, because the Liberals and the NDP will vote together. And the Conservatives will do, if the last 24 to 36 hours are any indication, largely nothing. However, let me acknowledge Leslyn Lewis, who tweeted her objections to all of this. She ran for leader of the Conservative Party, and it's too bad she didn't win, because she actually seems to care about freedom of speech a little more than current leader Erin O'Toole. Now, let's take a look at what they say about the coming censorship tools in Blacklock's, a small website that watches the government. And let's take a look at Blacklock's while we still can, because this law is designed to put an end to Blacklock's as well. It reads, Cabinet yesterday proposed to appoint a chief internet censor with sweeping powers to block websites, investigate anonymous complaints, and conduct closed-door hearings into legal but hurtful content deemed a threat to democratic institutions. Technical papers released by Heritage Minister Steven Guilbeault's department said Cabinet would determine the threshold for what constitutes potentially illegal content. Social media is being used to spread potentially illegal and abusive content, Guilbeault said in a statement. First ever regulation of the internet in Canada is required, he added. We need consistent and transparent rules. Cabinet would appoint a chief censor called the Digital Safety Commissioner to provide advice on content moderation and issue compliance orders on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and other service providers under threat of $25 million fines. Censored content, however, was not defined. However, anonymous complainants could trigger an investigation over websites deemed to distort the free exchange of ideas by discrediting or silencing targeted voices or threaten national security, the rule of law, and democratic institutions, wrote staff. The Safety Commissioner would be empowered to block websites or make content inaccessible in Canada. The government intends to introduce a bill in the fall of 2021, said the discussion guide. This consultation is an important step. What consultation? They're not going to talk to anybody who's on the internet. Liberals included in this coming legislation tools to combat terrorism or crimes online like sex trafficking and child abuse. But this is all a pernicious lie, because those things are already subject to criminal code and police enforcement. Hate speech has been banned in Canada since 1970. I'm sure you've seen stories about suspected terrorists being arrested for their online actions and people who hurt kids for clicks and views. Those people are also arrested too under existing Canadian laws. This isn't about that. This is about what the Liberals call harmful content, things that are clearly not illegal, just offensive to Liberals. Things like being a COVID skeptic, a carbon tax critic, a Trump supporter, or basically a mainstream conservative. The liberals will use that vague, harmful word, which so often refers to a feeling an overly sensitive person has but can't control, and lump it all in with terrorism and crime to bury it. But that's the real purpose here, to criminalize things that are counter to the liberal worldview on any manner of issue. Here's the technical paper. We'll post it here. You can read it for yourself, but let's go through just some of it together so you can get a real feel for just how bad this is, how this will put the internet under liberal control. And those of us who will resist the control, well, we'll be banned, fined, or maybe even worse. Look at this. The Act should provide that an online communication service provider, so like YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, must take all reasonable measures, which can include the use of automated systems to identify harmful content that is communicated on its online communication service and that is accessible to persons in Canada, and to make that harmful content inaccessible to persons in Canada, as may be prescribed through regulations by the Digital Safety Commissioner on the approval by the Governor in Council. So basically what they did in Cuba to stop people from organizing protests online. And AI could be used to determine that you are hateful based on the parameters laid out by some triggered by everything worrywart liberal somewhere in a cubicle. Within 24 hours of your content being flagged either by AI or by some scolding hate watcher, it's going to be taken down and the incident must be recorded, documented for the commissioner, and maybe even reported to the RCMP. This could happen to you for a mean tweet. Now, Section 8 lays out what this new censorship ministry will cover: terrorism, revenge porn, child abuse, incitement to violence, and criticism of those protected in the new amended Human Rights Code. And we will get to that in a second. But in Section 9, we see the Liberals are going after everyone they don't like by giving the power to their Ministry of Truth and the MPs to determine what is harmful going forward with absolutely no constraints on that power. Look at this. The Act should provide authority for the Governor and Council to, by regulation, further define certain specific terms used in the definitions of harmful content. Think about that for a second. What things do the Liberals already think are harmful? It's more than just political people who are going to get the hammer of censorship here. Not even close. Are you pro-life? Well, the Liberals think that's harmful. The Liberals are currently on a crusade to fund reproductive rights in the developing world. And your deeply held convictions and your objections to your money being spent that way, that's a threat to Liberals. And I'm not even joking, because in Alberta, pro-life organizations out-fundraise the Liberals here. Wouldn't the Liberals just love to use this law to shut those people up and cut them off from their fundraising? Maybe you believe that the best place for children to be raised, as the evidence overwhelmingly shows, is in the confines of a traditional marriage. Oh boy, that's harmful. The feminists are not going to like that. I mean, Trudeau wants all of us women just hammered into the workforce, whether we want to be there or not. And speaking of marriage and traditional gender roles, questioning gender theory itself is a harmful thing to the Liberals. If you think there are just two genders, and maybe you concluded that based on, I don't know, examination of scientific evidence, or maybe a deeply held religious conviction, or just plain old secular common sense, well, that's hate speech. It's basically terrorism under the coming laws, and the groundwork for all of that was laid out with Bill C-16, which made gender expression a specific protected class. And if you think I'm exaggerating about the coming crackdown, well, friends, it's already happening. Look at this tweet from Pastor Henry Hildebrandt from the Church of God in Aylmer, Ontario. He was blocked from uploading for a week. His crime? Christian services. Facebook already wouldn't let my weather tax skeptic friends at Friends of Science advertise for a free speech event. I know. And YouTube demonetized Rebel News on that platform for a video that was titled "Big Tech Censored Trump, It Can Censor You Too." It's all so shameless, and it's all without an ounce of self-awareness. But these big tech companies, they don't need to be self-aware. The government is on big tech's side, and big tech reciprocates. What I mean to say here is that the social media companies, once bastions and defenders of free speech, the modern public square, are already actively signaling to the Liberals in Canada that they will have no problem enforcing this coming law, and they will do it vigorously and enthusiastically. They'll all collude to make sure that we all have no recourse to any of this. The big tech companies aren't going to stand for the free speech that built their companies, so that falls squarely on us. And here's the real reason the Liberals need this law. It's not really about harmful content and protecting the public from dangerous thoughts. It's truly about ending the criticism of government and big government waste and bad bureaucrats and awful bureaucracies and inept members of parliament. Don't believe me? Here's Guilbeault saying so himself before a Heritage Committee back in January, when he was proclaiming and professing why this censorship was necessary in the first place. Take a listen.
Earlier, I think that Canada has a world-renowned public service, and it's integral that we don't attack them to try and score political points. Everybody in this country, and especially elected officials, have, I think, a responsibility, a duty to ensure that we protect our institutions, and that the last thing we should try and do is to somehow diminish them just in the hope that we could score points.
Now, Guilbeault said in a podcast after that in March that the politicians, they're the real victims here, and they must be spared the criticisms of the very people who elected them and pay their salaries. Take a listen.
We've seen too many examples of public officials retreating from public service due to the hateful online content targeted towards themselves or even their families. I have seen firsthand, alongside other Canadians, the damaging effects harmful content has on our families, our values, and our institutions.
This is the biggest fight on the horizon. This is how the Liberals plan to silence Rebel News, but you too, and millions of other Canadians who disagree with what the Liberals are doing. And of course, the Liberals waited until Parliament was over to announce it. Not that I expect Erin O'Toole to object very vigorously, and so far as I make this video, he hasn't quite yet, and it's been over 24 hours since this was all announced. Conservatives are about to be silenced, banned, fined, or worse, and the rest will get the message to just shut up, to go along to get along, because they saw what happened to the others who didn't shut up. And where is Mr. "We're the only party that will protect free speech" O'Toole? So far asleep at the switch, while the worst censorship law in the free world is coming to smother Canadians. I think we have to fight back hard, like the heart of freedom depends on it. Because it truly does. If you can't say what's on your mind, in your heart, how you feel about the government, what the government is doing to you, if you can't profess your faith or talk about social issues, about marriage, medicine, and the culture, are you even free? I guess as free as a sheep in the pen, you can wander, but never beyond the fence. For your safety, you see. I want to live in a free world where this video is not illegal. If you do too, please visit stopthecensorship.ca while you still can and sign our petition calling on the censorship minister, Steven Guilbeault, to stop this madness and to leave our free speech alone. We must be free to express ourselves in a free society. Violence and abuse are already taken care of under existing laws. Steven Guilbeault's new law is about protecting himself from your speech and your criticism. So let's send him a message. Please go to stopthecensorship.ca today, sign and share that petition. For Rebel News, I'm Sheila Gunn Reid. Justin Trudeau's Liberals are about to use a brand new censorship law to take away the human rights of Canadians to express themselves freely. This is outrageous. We need to fight back. Nobody else is. Please go to stopthecensorship.ca and sign our petition.